In this clip, we're going to go ahead and start sculpting our cliff. So here I imported the mesh into the ZBrush. And before I start, I'm going to go ahead and actually split it into individual pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and click Auto Group. And can go Subtools and Split, Group Split. So now I can work on these individually. Now I don't want to merge them all together just yet because I want to go ahead and actually have a little bit more freedom to just manipulate them individually, and then I'm going to go ahead and merge them together. So let's go ahead and add some Dynamesh. I'm just going to go here, Dynamesh, and let's try 1000. That seems pretty good. And let's go ahead and start sculpting. I'm just going to go ahead and actually solo this one out. And I'm going to start with using the AJ polish here. And just going to go in and start breaking those corners here. I'm actually going to go ahead and change my matte cap here. Here we go. So I'm just going to go in and just start chipping away the corners. I want to try and preserve as much of that squarey shape, but in the same time I want it to look like a rock and not just a bunch of cubes. Just a little bit more. And just gonna create some unique silhouette pieces. So maybe break this piece off a little bit. And I'm gonna hold Shift and just select the planar brush and just planar these bits out here. I'll do the same here. And the same here. I'm just gonna go again on the corners and just get those cracked up a little bit. So another thing you always could do is you could just create a couple cubes, in ZBrush and sculpt them first and then just use them to populate the cliff. But in this case, I decided to just go ahead and sculpt each one individually. So I'm just going to go to the next one, and again, Dynamesh, around 1000. And just going to continue doing that to most of these cubes here. Use Shift to use planar brush. It's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead into this one, again, 1000. Just gonna solo it out. And it's just a little bit easier to work on them individually because when you have such a big pieces, first of all, you kind of lose the track of scale. So if I was to sculpt this all at once, I might, overdo it and things might look a little bit too blobby. So if I just work on these individually at first, I have a better understanding of the scale of this thing. And it is huge. Like, this is supposed to be a floating island, so I don't want to underestimate that by any way. So I'm just sort of sculpting in, just creating some interesting shapes here. I'm going to maybe use a clay buildup a little bit, just create some kind of interesting shapes here, and then use the orb flatten, redynamesh, and just use the flatten brush, just to create some kind of interesting shapes here. And I'm not at this point concerned too much about the fidelity of these rocks. I just want to create the shapes that would look good, and then after that I would go in and add sort of details to them. So at this point I'm just sculpting away. Again, 1000. And so the idea is to just create as many of those as possible. Now in here I have quite a big gap and I'm not sure if I like this, so I'm going to go ahead and select one of those. Go to Subtool, Duplicate, Move. I'm just going to click this little icon here to center the pivot. I'm just going to move it right about here. Scale it down a bit, maybe a bit wider. I'm just going to move it right over here. Just gonna redynamesh and smooth this out. And that's something I always do whenever I try to sculpt too many pieces individually. Oftentimes I would duplicate it a few times and move it around. Like this one here, I'm not sure if I'm liking this gap over here, so I'm gonna do the same thing. Just gonna go ahead and scale it out a little bit, move it up here, and then I can fix the smaller gap later on with when I combine all of these together. So I'm going to go in and add Dynamesh again to this one. And here we go. I'm going to go in and break those corners here. And this one is a little bit too straight. So I'm just going to go in and use Shift Control and select the clip curve here and just make it a little bit more angled on the bottom. Redynamesh. Let's select this one, again Dynamesh around 1000. I'm not too fussed about the number of Dynamesh, so if you sort of around 1000, you can just eyeball it a little bit. You don't have to have a precise number each time. It doesn't really matter. As long as you have enough topology to add your detail, that all that matters. That looks pretty good. I'm going to actually select this one now and move it a little bit down just to give a little bit of a break here. So I'm always trying to create these interesting shapes. I don't want anything to look too flat. The silhouette of the cliff is much more important than any of the detailing. So whenever you look around it, you want to make sure that it looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and select this piece now. Again, 1000 is good. About 1000 here. And I'm going to go in and break those corners again. Trying to do it a little bit faster just so you can see the flow I use and how I kind of go about this. And the idea is that once you sort of practice a little bit more and more with these stone shapes, it becomes quite natural. Although whenever you create natural objects, it's always tricky because even I've been doing these for years and years professionally, and still every time it's a challenge, and you kind of rock, always a challenge. So I'm just gonna go in here and break this one. That looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and actually scale this up. This one's a little too thin, doesn't look quite natural, so I'm gonna move it down, rotate a little bit. Here we go, that looks better. And I'm not worried about the top at all at this point because I know that there'll be grass in there. But if I was to make a proper cliff piece, I would also sculpt the top a little bit, just the same way, just break the corners. Here we go. Let's use a bit of a planar brush here. And so again, I'm not too worried right now about any detailing or anything like that. I'm just trying to make sure that everything looks right. So I'm just going to rotate this around here. So here, I'm still trying to create that perfect top so that my grass can go on it. So corners like this might be a little problematic, but I'm going to leave those for merge of all these rocks together. For now, I'm just leaving it as is. So I might just slightly fix up bigger ones that are a little bit too obvious and that will be harder to fix later. So let's do one more. I'm just gonna add Dynamesh here. And again, I'm just gonna center that. And in this case, I can't really scale it right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna click this lock button. And what that does is basically unlocks the pivot from the mesh. So now I can rotate the pivot without actually affecting the mesh. And then I'll lock it. And now I can scale it this way. So this new gizmo in ZBrush is really, really useful. And ever since it came out, I practically never used the old rotation tools. It's really helpful. And here we go. This is perfect. Let's go ahead and do just one last one here. Just going to move that a little bit and move it out. And again, I'm just trying to get it a little bit more interesting. When I was doing it in 3ds Max, I was just trying to get the shapes I'll need, but not necessarily in a perfect position. So now that I can see it a little bit clearer, I can go in and add the proper rotation and scale to those. Planar brush here again. Here we go. This is pretty good. So it's really looking up. I don't really like this rock here. Although it creates a nice silhouette, it's still a little bit too square. So I'm just going to go in and cut out this edge over here, make it a little softer here. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the rest of the rocks, and in the next tutorial we're going to go ahead and start combining these together and creating some better shapes.